So, one of the big problems with the war in Ukraine is that the Russians seem to believe that Ukraine is part of Russia, and they act as if that was the case. In fact, Putin, early on in the war, there were documents found that he thought that within 3 days they would take Kyiv, within 3 weeks they would take the rest of the country, and that the Ukrainians would come out with flowers to meet the Russian liberators who are saving them, and they'd be cheering them on, and no such thing has happened. In fact, it's been exactly the opposite, where the citizens have come out like a swarm of bees to repel the invaders. The Ukrainians do not think that they are Russian. Okay, Russians talk about Ukraine as Little Russia. Ukraine has a distinct identity that's not Russian. Okay, so I saw this and I thought, wow, there's something really powerful and explanatory about this. This was Anton Gerashenko, and he said Russian volunteers share that Ukrainians do not welcome them on occupied territories. They even try not to spend nights there for fear of not waking up. Wrap that around your mind, right? I mean, like, this is supposed to be the second most powerful army in the world, and they're afraid of the dark in Ukraine. And there's a reason they should be afraid of the dark in Ukraine. How do we become brotherly nations again? Well, when you say, how do we do something again, it's as if you're saying it was this way before. And to some degree, I get what they're saying. Yeah, there's even a clip circulating of Zelensky saying that, and he's saying the brotherly nation thing in the light of, look, we're not trying to persecute Russian speakers. Zelensky spoke Russian growing up. Like, that was his first tongue. So that was the context. But there's not a brotherliness. There's more of a you're under my thumbness. And there's a parallel here with let's say the U.S. and Canada. We're largely of a similar kind of stock, at least originally from Britain. But we see each other as they're Canadians, we're Americans. We're pretty similar, but and I don't know that we would call ourselves brother nations, but we have probably a greater claim to that than the Russians and Ukrainians, at least at this point. But if we did to Canada, I'm an American, if we invaded Canada, started breaking their things and killing people and shooting hotels and hospitals and kindergartens and whatever else, and I can imagine that the Canadians wouldn't be too happy with this, right? So if you were going to be brotherly, this is not the way to accomplish it. Okay, how do we become brotherly nations again? A voice behind the camera asked them. There's no way, the Russian volunteer replies. And I've been saying that and saying that and saying that. There is now generational hatred in between Ukraine and Russia that will last at least 2 generations, probably longer, before it actually cures. In the same way that the generational hatred from 1941, when the Japanese sucker punched the United States in Pearl Harbor, it took a while for the U.S. and the Japanese to be able to get along again. Okay, so I think that's what's going on here. Okay, so here we see this Russian volunteer talking about what his experience has been, and I'm going to read it. It says, look, the fact is a lot of information is leaked by the locals who live there. And you don't leak information if you're actually glad to see them handing them flowers. And they leak it. A little bit further, I want to say this: in Zaporizhia, Kherson regions, I get the impression that 70% of them are against our Russian world, the Ruski Mir. And it happens that in the Zaporizhia region, you can only fill up the car at the third gas station. The third gas station? Well, what's he talking about? And at 2 gas stations, they would go out and, in a purely Western Ukrainian language, send you to Putin to refuel. You understand what this is about? And so there are people who will leak information. And I even met some grandfather with a grandmother. It just recently happened. I am a Ukrainian to the marrow of my bones, and I will be a Ukrainian, and I don't need this Russian world at all, and so I will only be for Ukraine. The people have divided what is in their heads, how they want to live, And therefore, there are a lot of traitors there, a lot of traitors. Okay, these aren't traitors. These are patriots. You are an invader. So they're not traitors against their own country. They're protecting their own country. And you can't really see that. Therefore, the local population, civilians there, should be feared. Now think about this. They're fearing grandma and grandpa, right? I mean, they're really worried about anyone. So it's one thing to occupy a land, like you need a certain ratio of people, like 1 to 40 for the population or something. I don't remember what it was. But if it's really, really a hostile territory, you need a higher ratio. The Russians don't have that, and they can't actually muster a larger ratio, and so they have to operate very, very carefully. This is a sign, this is the primary sign that Ukraine is not Russia. Therefore, the local population, civilians there, should be feared. Goes on. And even the soldiers themselves and all the guys, if we move there, we try to choose the time of day to go there. Early in the morning to finish going around the place, all the units during the daylight hours, because there is a curfew, and also it's very dangerous to spend the night somewhere there. You may simply not wake up in the morning. Wow, that's something. Okay, that's telling you how hostile Ukraine is toward Russia. And regardless of the time, go to the territory of mainland Russia, so to speak. The interviewer says, the picture you described is, of course, far from what official media tells us. And he asks, what is your opinion when to expect peace? And they reply, we first need to understand what we mean by the word peace in this case. As it was 25 years ago when we used to go to Ukraine, we lived 100 kilometers away from the border, and we went to Kharkiv for the weekend to buy cakes for something else, to relax, to see friends, and that it will never be like that again. I believe that that's the case. I mean, you're never going to get to a place, because there's just too much bad blood now, where your neighbor has come in and invaded and killed a member of your family and destroyed your home and whatnot. How can we become brotherly nations again? And his conclusion was, that is impossible. And I think it is impossible. I don't think like what Putin was trying to do was bring Ukraine into the fold, and what he actually did was push them more effectively into the arms of NATO than even Poland or the Baltic states, who fled into the arms of NATO as soon as they possibly could get away. They fled. Ukraine is even more urgently interested in joining NATO. Okay, that's what I wanted to share with you. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your attention, and thank you for being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine. Now, if you subscribe and I put this below, I'll make you think, or you get your money back. Thanks for your time.